When Lieutenant Rourke returns from a mission with a sunburn, his alien crewmates mistake it for lethal radiation damage. What follows is a whirlwind of panic, containment domes, and baffling medical scans, until one injury sparks a deeper lesson about pain, healing, and what it really means to be human. The first real misunderstanding happened 13 minutes after Lieutenant James Rourke got back to the expedition ship Silora. He had just finished a solo survey on Kale 6, a desert moon orbiting a gas giant so volatile it practically hummed in gamma. Rourke stood at the ship's decontamination bay, peeling the crinkled fabric of his heat suit off with a grunt, his skin blotched with an angry red sheen from his neck to his arms. He didn't even blink. It felt like a nasty sunburn after a spring weekend in Nevada, something he'd walk off with cold water and aloe. The problem was that the crew of the Silora was 96% alien. Captain Threx, an insectoid-adjacent biped with a bulbous head and glinting black eyes, froze the moment he spotted Rourke's scorched skin through the visor port. He didn't even open the airlock. Instead, a second layer of shielding snapped over the window, alarms flared, and a synthesized voice started barking something in 6 languages. James, still barefoot and sweaty, frowned. "What the hell is this?" "Human James?" Threx's voice crackled through the intercom, tight with what Rourke had come to recognize as restrained panic. "Remain stationary. You are exhibiting signs of acute radiation degeneration." "What?" "No," James said, blinking as the outer door sealed behind him. "I'm just sunburnt. You guys ever heard of that?" A new alarm started wailing. Within 20 seconds, the floor panels beneath him hissed apart and extended a clear containment dome. It dropped around him with the subtle grace of a guillotine. "God damn it," James muttered. By the next hour, the isolation protocol was in full swing. The containment dome had its own filtration, nanobot scrubbers, and negative pressure fields designed for xenopathogen lockdowns. Rourke sat inside on a fold-out bench, glancing at his skin, still red, still hot, definitely sore, but not getting worse. Outside, Commander Lavis, a tall sapient resembling walking tree bark, was holding a scanner the size of a lawn chair and frowning with all 4 eyebrows. "Your dermal layers are necrotizing," Lavas stated through the speaker. "The tissue is reacting as if it has undergone advanced cellular meltdown. Gamma or delta radiation?" "UV," James said, holding up a blistered forearm. "Specifically UVA and UVB. Look, back home this happens if you skip sunscreen." Captain Threx joined the feed, projecting his face onto the dome wall. "You willingly exposed yourself to solar radiation?" "Technically, yeah. The heat suit's seal popped open at the neck. I didn't realize until the return trip, but it's just superficial, a burn." Threx was quiet for a moment. Then, "Your species considers open radiation exposure superficial?" James exhaled, shifting. His shoulders throbbed with heat, and his skin was tight where it had started to peel slightly. "Sunburn. You don't have sun where you come from?" "Not in the manner your system delivers it," Lavas said. "We do not casually roast ourselves in celestial emissions." James gave a half-hearted shrug, then winced. "Well, we don't try to, it just happens." 8 hours later, he was still inside the dome. The medical unit had run a blood panel twice. The readings baffled them. Elevated white cells, mild dehydration, skin protein breakdown. To the Silora's crew, it was the onset of systemic organ decay. To James, it was Sunday afternoon in July. They didn't trust his instincts. Dr. Geffel, a bioluminescent mollusk thing that floated in an oxygenated mobility tank, glided close to the containment field and blinked through its transparent lid. "I have prepared antiviral plasma infusions and subdermal neuroblocks to counteract epidermal degeneration," Geffel said. "You must remain immobile." "Jabel," James said patiently, "you're giving me an IV and a neural inhibitor for a sunburn. You are radiated. I'm burned. I need hydration, rest, and aloe, preferably chilled." Geffel clicked a button on the tank's console. "You will be kept in medical isolation until the crisis passes." James groaned and leaned back against the dome wall. "This is going to be a long week." 2 days later, Rourke was still in the dome. His skin had started to peel, sheets of thin, flaking epidermis sloughing off his shoulders and chest. This led to another round of panic. Lovaas had declared it dermal slough syndrome, and Threx had upgraded his condition to critical. James tried to explain the concept of epidermal regeneration. No, I'm not dying. Skin peels after a burn, then new skin grows underneath. That's literally the process. Threx was unmoved. You are disintegrating. I am healing. That afternoon, they brought in Dr. Zium, a crystalline being with laser-calibrated senses. Zium performed a full-body scan and declared with chilling certainty this level of tissue damage in a Virillin would precede full system collapse. Well, I'm not a Virillin, James snapped, now thoroughly irritated and slightly itchy. That fact, Zem said, may be the only reason you are still alive. By day 5, the redness had faded. James was back to his normal color, save for a faint bronze tint and a fine map of fading flakes on his arms. He was sitting in the dome's shower pod, letting lukewarm water run over his back, when the intercom beeped. "Huma James," Thrax said. "Dr. Geffel has noted reduced radiation markers and stabilized enzyme activity. We are considering partial reintegration." James laughed. "Partial? You act like I exploded. I literally have new skin now. This is just normal for us." There was a pause. "You regenerate?" James raised an eyebrow at the speaker. "All mammals do. It's biology. We get hurt, we heal. It's not that special." Thrax sounded unconvinced. "You casually accept bodily decay and reformation as routine." "It's not fun," James said, "but yeah, pretty much." Later that evening, they let him out of the dome but only into the medbay, still under strict supervision. He was made to wear an environmental suit despite being fully recovered. Every hour, Gefil took vitals, ran blood tests, and asked increasingly strange questions about cellular memory and mitochondrial behavior. James, exhausted, finally said, "Look, if it helps you sleep, fine, but next time, just trust me when I say it's a sunburn." Gefil didn't blink, having no eyelids. "Your species walks willingly beneath a nuclear furnace, accumulate dermal burns, and simply continues." "We also invented poolside margaritas," James said. "It's a trade-off." By the end of the week, Rourke was cleared for duty. Mostly. Ferex still insisted on scanning him each morning. Lavas treated him with the wary politeness usually reserved for plague survivors. And Zem had submitted a paper to the Galactic Medical Assembly titled The Paradox of Human Sunfire Endurance. James, for his part, spent his first free day lounging near the Silora's forward observation port, enjoying the rays of a distant binary star through UV-save shielding. He had a cool drink in hand and a gel pack on his shoulders. Commander Lovaas entered the room and paused. "You are seeking radiation again?" James grinned. "It's called sunbathing." Lovaas shook his head slowly. "You are either extraordinarily resilient or recklessly self-destructive. Can't it be both?" Lovaas considered that. "In your case, perhaps." James raised his glass. "Here's to being human." 2 weeks had passed since the Great Radiation Incident, as the Silora's crew had come to call it. James Rourke, now fully healed with a distinct bronze glow, had finally been granted unrestricted movement aboard the ship. Not that it made much difference everywhere he went. Someone was still scanning him. "Do I need a hall pass too?" he muttered, as a small, drone-like nursebot hovered past him, its scanners quietly buzzing. "Just trying to get to the gym." "You are a biological curiosity," Zem said calmly from behind him. "We remain vigilant." Rourke turned, face deadpan. "I'm not radioactive anymore. You all ran enough tests to sterilize me. That is unconfirmed." James huffed and walked on. The gym was the one place left where he could sweat without someone mistaking it for tissue liquefaction. He was halfway through his warm-up when the announcement came over the intercom. A diplomatic transport had sent a distress beacon from Kale 6's orbit, the same moon James had surveyed. Something about a cargo malfunction and suspected radiation leakage. Immediately, he knew what was coming. 3 hours later, Rourke was suited up and back aboard a shuttle, en route to the stranded diplomatic vessel. Captain Threx had protested. "You are a recent radiation casualty. I'm a recovered scout with lunar surface experience. You are also reckless." James had shrugged. "And yet, here I go." The diplomatic ship was listing in orbit when they arrived. No external hull damage, no visible breaches. The airlock engaged without issue, and within moments James was stepping into a corridor lit only by emergency LEDs. His helmet HUD flickered to life. "Minimal radiation spikes," he said over the comm. "Background ambient, nothing critical." The engineering bay told a different story. The backup core had partially vented, coating the rear chamber in ionized particles. The ship's crew 2 Cerellians and a Zarn delegate were huddled inside a sealed galley, visibly shaking. When James entered, they froze. "Is contaminated," one of the Cerellians rasped. Rourke pointed to his badge. "I'm here to help." "You were burned," the Zarn delegate snapped, pressing its limbs to the wall as though distance offered immunity. "You deteriorated. You should not be functional." James sighed. "Not this again." He moved past them, keeping his tone calm. "You're not in danger. I've got full clearance and containment. Also, I'm not glowing, if that helps." The Zarn watched him warily. "Your species burns and then heals? From radiation?" "Ultraviolet light, technically. It's not the same as a power core leak." "You were red and flaking." James adjusted his gloves. "I moisturize, we're fine." He got to work rerouting the ship's power flow, bypassing the damaged core and engaging the reserve conduit. The system whined, but held. Within 15 minutes, power returned, stabilizers kicked in, and life support normalized. When he returned to the galley, the aliens stared at him with something that hovered between awe and terror. The Zarn delegate approached, keeping one eye on James's skin. "Your species. It regrows its outer tissues. You conduct repairs while healing. You navigate radiation without systemic failure." James packed up his toolkit. "We try not to, but when we do, yeah, we deal." The Zarn muttered, "Unnatural." Back aboard the Silora, James went straight to the med bay to log his exposure data. Geffel greeted him with a fresh scanner. "You may have sustained secondary exposure to mixed radiation," Geffel said. "I will initiate full screening." "Of course you will," James mumbled. He sat still while the suite of machines buzzed, beeped, and occasionally blinked red. His vitals were normal. His skin, save for a mild sweat sheen, showed no signs of trauma. Geffel stared at the results with the same intensity he usually reserved for viral anomalies. "You're not deteriorating." "No epidermal slough." "None. You should still be monitored." James rubbed his eyes. "Fine. But maybe set it to every 12 hours, not every 2. Geffel hesitated, then agreed. "I will log the recommendation." A few days later, a panel discussion was held on the ship's observation deck. Several species medical officers were invited to review recent data on human solar trauma resilience. James sat on the edge of the room, sipping water and trying not to look annoyed. Jem opened the presentation with a slide titled "Observed Regeneration Patterns in Homo sapiens Post-Radiation Exposure." Subject Rourke, Zim began, demonstrated acute epidermal trauma following ambient stellar exposure. Symptoms included redness, peeling, fluid loss, and temporary lethargy. No pharmacological intervention was required. Full tissue recovery occurred in 7 standard days. Several attendees gasped. Porian researcher raised a limb. "You applied no grafting matrix?" "None." "Did the subject not suffer from dermal agony?" James cleared his throat. "Yeah, it hurt. A lot. I just didn't scream about it every 10 minutes. There were murmurs." Jem continued. "Moreover, human dermal cells regenerate without need for exoskin. Structural reformation occurs beneath the damaged layer. This appears to be intentional biology." A Selesh delegate, all muscle and bone plate, scoffed. "And you consider this normal?" James shrugged. "We have ozone for a reason, but sometimes things slip through. We adapt." Adaptation implies choice, the Selesh said. James met his eyes. Adaptation is choice. We don't like getting burned, but we're not made of porcelain. Threx stepped forward then, addressing the assembly. While I initially considered Lieutenant Rourke's behavior irresponsible, I now acknowledge that his response was culturally and biologically appropriate. Our error was in applying xenomedical assumptions. James blinked. That almost sounded like an apology. Threx added, that said, future exposure will still require immediate reporting. James held up both hands. Deal. No more surprise tanning. The audience laughed, well, the ones with mouths. That evening, Lavos found James back at the observation port, quietly watching the swirling golds and blues of a nearby star. Do you feel affected? Kings turned. By the sunburn? By their reactions? By being considered alien even here? He thought for a moment. Honestly? Yeah. It's weird being the guy everyone thinks is about to melt. Lavos joined him at the railing. You were melting. James chuckled. Only a little. Lavos tapped his data slate. Still, your recovery intrigued many. Some fear it, others admire it. James didn't reply at first. Then he said, You know what the weird part is? Back home we don't even think about it. You get burned, you heal. It sucks, but you move on. We're used to stuff hurting. Getting better isn't special. Lavos looked at him thoughtfully. Perhaps that is what makes it special. James smiled faintly. Maybe. The medbay doors hissed open for the second time that day, but this time James Rourke wasn't the one stumbling in. Dr. Geffel's translator unit was already warbling as he hovered toward the stretcher being rushed inside by two nurse bots. Radiation blistering, Class 2 dermal response, the lead bot reported. Subject is Zarn species. Deliberate solar exposure from Kale 6 surface outpost. Duration 6 minutes. James, standing off to the side as part of his routine follow-up, blinked. Wait, they went out in the sun? Geffel didn't reply. He was already flooding the treatment bay with cooling foam. James watched, arms crossed, as the Zarn, a previously skeptical diplomat, moaned softly, its mucosal skin blistered and weeping. A part of James wanted to say, told you so, but it didn't feel right. After a moment, he asked, why was he even down there? Geffel's answer came flat. Curiosity. That incident started a trend. Within the week, 3 more crew members were admitted, with varying levels of controlled radiation burns. All had one thing in common. They'd studied James's medical logs and attempted to emulate his exposure under what they called research conditions. It wasn't lost on James that none of them were human. I don't get it, he muttered to Threx during an engineering diagnostic. They're trying to imitate a mistake. They are attempting to understand your limits, Threx replied. They assume that if you can recover from such damage, they may, with sufficient care, access similar biological resilience. James gave him a look. That's not how this works. They can't just copy healing. We evolved for it. They didn't. Indeed, Threx said. Yet many believe proximity to adversity creates adaptation. Not instantly, James said. Otherwise I'd have gills from falling into the lake at 10. Threx tilted his head. Did you? No, I got pneumonia, much less cool. After the 4th incident, a Mirren linguist who collapsed after 10 minutes beneath Kale 6's sun, despite 3 layers of shielding, James requested a meeting with the crew's behavioral science officer. Dr. Rezvoon was a soft-spoken telepathic species, whose mind-text communication appeared as pulses across the room's interface. You perceive a pattern, Voon pulsed. Explain. James sat down, rubbing his temples. They're hurting themselves, trying to what? Be like me? Copy my injuries? You were isolated, scanned, feared, and then celebrated. I was sunburned, which your peers interpreted as death. Yet you recovered. That doesn't mean they should throw themselves into a nuclear sauna. They wish to understand, Voon replied. And in understanding, they seek to feel what you felt. James stared at the interface, slowly realizing what this was. It wasn't admiration, it was emulation. In the most literal, dangerous sense. I need to speak at the next crew-wide assembly. Voon agreed. 3 days later, James stood before the ship's full complement in the central forum. The dome lights dimmed. A visual feed showed a simplified skin layer diagram. Burns, inflammation, regeneration. Then James stepped forward. I know what some of you are trying to do, he said. I get it. You saw me survive something and you think that means it's safe, that you can do it too. But what I went through wasn't special. It wasn't strength. It was just being human. The room was silent. James looked across the crowd. When I got back from KL6, I was in pain. My skin blistered. I couldn't sleep on my back for 3 nights. I peeled for days. And yeah, I had lived, but it wasn't fun. And it wasn't something to repeat. A slow murmur began to ripple through the forum. You can study humans all you want, James continued. But don't mistake our accidents for achievements. We don't get tougher by hurting ourselves. We get tougher by surviving despite it. Someone near the back Zem probably asked, then what do you define as resilience? James didn't hesitate. Resilience is healing after you're broken. It's knowing something will hurt and trying anyway because you have no choice, not because you're trying to prove you can. He paused. And just for the record, sunburns suck. That got a chuckle. A cautious, alien chuckle, but enough. The trend stopped after that. Radiation exposure experiments were banned outside of controlled research labs. Yeffel made it clear that no one, not even James, would be treated if they intentionally endangered themselves. That rule didn't need to be enforced. Something had shifted. The crew began to ask him real questions, not about how much pain he could take, but how humans felt when injured, how they coped, what they feared, what made them recover emotionally, not just physically. James gave honest answers. Sometimes it's time. Sometimes it's other people. Sometimes it's dumb luck. And sometimes it's just a cold shower and aloe. Late one night, Lavas joined James in the galley. The tree-like alien brought a bottle of something vaguely sap-like and offered it as a gift. For your skin, he said dryly. James laughed and took a sip. Tastes like eucalyptus. Thick layers of ice. They sat in silence for a while. Stars drifted past the forward viewport like dust in a floodlight. Lavas finally said, When you first returned from the surface, we were convinced you would die. I thought you might exile me. We nearly did. James nodded. Why didn't you? You insisted you were fine. James cracked a grin. And I was. Lavas looked sideways. You were scorched. I've had worse. Is that also human resilience? James leaned back in his seat. No, that's just terrible judgment. Blas barked something that might have been a laugh. The final flare came from KL6's sun, 12 days after James Rourke's speech. It was an X-class solar burst, the kind of stellar tantrum that fried satellite arrays and made shielded observatories blink. The Silora's sensors picked it up an hour in advance, enough time to initiate orbital repositioning, enough time for one last misunderstanding. James was in the auxiliary lab when the power flickered. Shield cycling, Zem reported calmly, external fields adapting to flare intensity. Any chance it hits us directly? James asked, watching readouts shift. Zem tilted slightly. Minimal. But surface outposts on KL6 will be at risk. Emergency recall protocols are active. Wait, someone's still down there? Zem scanned the manifest. Yes, Cadet Yalari. She delayed return to continue geological sampling. James stood, already pulling on his suit. We've got to bring her back. Team is under shelter. Shelter didn't help me much. Zem hesitated. You survived. Barely. I'm not betting on luck. The descent shuttle barely held steady against the flare's rising interference. James gritted his teeth, hands braced on the panel as turbulence jolted the hull. They found Yalari huddled inside a field station, surrounded by solar-charged debris and emergency insulation. Her skin, normally a dull lilac, had flushed to a deep blue. She wasn't unconscious, but she wasn't moving fast either. James moved quick, checking her vitals. Pulse elevated, respiration shallow. She's been out here too long. Radiation exposure level? Geffel asked through the comm. James glanced at the reader. Higher than mine, definitely acute. She's going to need full therapy and probably dermal regeneration. Evacuate immediately. They barely made it back through the upper atmosphere. Shielding on the shuttle's port side overloaded twice, and James had to reroute the secondary manifold by hand mid-flight. The moment they breached the Silora's hangar, medical bots surrounded the hatch. Geffel took over, guiding Ilari into containment. She didn't speak, but her hand curled briefly around James's sleeve before they pulled her away. For the next 36 hours, the ship was quiet. No one made jokes, no one laughed about humans and their weird skin. James stayed near the medbay, watching Gefil and the others work. They weren't panicked now. They were focused, calm, confident in their process. He recognized that calm. It was the same calm he had to adopt on Earth, during wildland fire season, when things went sideways. The calm that only comes after you've been burned before. On the second day, Geffel emerged from isolation. She will recover, he said simply. James exhaled for what felt like the first time in 2 days. A small ceremony followed, not formal, just quiet acknowledgement. Yulari, propped up on a gurney, looked at James through tired eyes. I was trying to finish the survey, she said hoarsely. James nodded. I know. I thought I could handle the heat. I studied your logs. I thought maybe... You don't have to be like me to survive, James said gently. You just have to know when to get out of the sun. Yulari tried to smile. It half worked. You came back for me. Of course I did. Even after what they did to you. James grinned. Let's call that payback. Later that week, the crew made a small adjustment to the ship's xenomedical training protocols. Instead of just lists and graphs, they included personal narratives, records from humans about pain, recovery, and vulnerability. Not just data, context. James helped write the first entry. It didn't focus on resilience or strength. It talked about the sting, the sleepless nights, the shame of being treated like a walking hazard, and the strange comfort in knowing others would learn from it. He ended it with, if you see a human with peeling shoulders, don't panic. Just offer aloe and some water. Maybe even ask how their day's going. The document was archived under Cross-Cultural Recovery, Lessons from Human Exposure Events. The next time the Silora entered a star system, the entire crew watched the sun through polarized windows. Some stared in reverence, others with caution. James just watched quietly, arms crossed, a fresh bottle of aloe stuffed into his pocket as a joke. Threx stood beside him. You were right, the captain said. We treated your condition like contagion, when it was merely pain. It's never merely pain, James replied, but yeah, it passes. You still went back down? She needed help. You risked repeating the incident. I figured if I could survive one sunburn, James said, I could survive another. Threx nodded slowly. It seems we've all learned something. James chuckled. If not, I've got enough medical logs to make a trilogy. As the sun flared gently in the distance, the crew watched, no longer fearful, just aware, curious, maybe a little wiser. And James, standing among them, didn't feel like an outlier anymore. He felt human, and that was enough.